Yeah. So what are your concerns with research writing, and would you like me to focus on in this presentation? Do you have any specific questions about this? So please post them, and I will try and look at these questions in a while. Right. I'd like to begin by talking about certain assumptions that I am making as we go into this presentation. The first is, I think we want to question what our aspirations are as researchers. When I say researchers, I'm talking about you and I as academics, or you and I as, or I think some of you joining this session could be postgraduate students as well, those of you doing your master's and your PhD, right? And I think others, some of you may also be lecturers. First, I'd like to speak to you, the lecturers, the academics at Universitas Wiraswasta. I think what's very important for us to agree on is the fact that as academics, as lecturers, we are not just in universities to transfer knowledge to our students. It is not just about us reading books and research papers and conveying that information to our students. But as academics, we must also be generators of knowledge, right? It's not about just receiving that information and passing that information on to students, but we must also be on this journey of discovery to discover new knowledge. Because if we do not get into this culture of carrying out research and sharing our research with a wider audience, then the question really comes to mind. What is our role as academics? How are we different from, say, teachers in schools, right? So if you're a teacher in school, you're pretty much, referring to a textbook and passing that knowledge on to your students. But at university, as academics, we do that, right? We do share knowledge based on our readings and our expertise in certain areas. But at the same time, we must also be active researchers. And this is important for the success of not just you as individual academics, but also the success of your faculty, as well as the success of the university. Because universities require its academics to be actively involved in research. If you are postgraduate students, then the question that you want to ask yourself is, what makes my pursuit of a master's degree or a PhD different from the journey I was on when I completed my bachelor's degree, right? So as a bachelor's degree student, you would have, attended lectures, received a lot of information on the content of the subject, and then you would have sat for exams, passed those exams, and graduated. Now that you've come into the postgraduate level as a master's student or a PhD student, you are also now in the pursuit of generating knowledge, right? You want to contribute to the existing body of knowledge which is already available. And therefore, you undertake research, right? Research that is going to contribute a new layer of knowledge to the kind of knowledge which is already out there. So as academics or as postgraduate students, we are interested in contributing to an existing body of knowledge. And that is our whole aim. Now, once you get into research, it's not just about doing research and writing a report for the university or whoever is funding your research. You want to ensure that the knowledge that you have generated is shared with a larger audience. And for that to happen, we have to write research papers and publish it in journals, right? Journals would be the primary source of reference for academics as well as postgraduate students. because journal publications come out on a regular basis, right? Maybe quarterly, right? Or half yearly. So there's always this addition of new knowledge which takes place um, in journals as compared to maybe a textbook, right? Because a textbook may take some time before it comes out. So this is the whole idea of, of uh, us being researchers and our aspirations, right? We want to carry out research, we want to investigate, we want to report, and we want to share this knowledge with a wider audience. So this brings me to this next question. Is it now, today, in this day and age, way too easy to publish, right? Has publication become easier now compared to years ago? So like I said, I can't see you and I can't really kind of gauge how old you are, right? Some of you, but if some of you are, in your 40s or 50s, right, towards the end of your academic career, if you think back to the time, when we were students in the 1990s, let's say, when the internet was not as prominent as it is now. What did we do as students? What we did was we used to go to the library, and in our libraries, there would be a very limited number of journals which was subscribed in our libraries. We would go and borrow these journal articles and then read these articles. Sometimes the library did not even allow us to take these journals out of the library, right? So we were very constricted in that sense, right? Our access to journal articles was very, very limited. However, if I ask you, when is the last time you actually walked into a library? I think many of you would probably find it difficult to remember when was the last time you went into a library. Because as researchers looking for knowledge, what do? We go online. We go into Google Scholar, right? Or we go into some other digital platform which allows us to access journal articles. But if you go into Google Scholar now and you type in a topic, any topic of your choice, which you are interested in, you will find tens and thousands of results being generated, if not, hundreds and thousands of results, depending on the keywords that you type in. Okay, so the question now is it now too easy to publish? I would say it is. Publishing research work is not difficult now. You could probably publish tomorrow if you really wanted to. But then comes the question, where do you want to publish? That's the question that we have to really reflect on. And I think those of you who are joining me here today, you are aware about the problem which exists now. The problem is not about publishing, but the challenge is about publishing in reputable quality journals. And I think it may be the same in your university as it is in mine. We are all now increasingly aware about the challenges of publishing in journals. I don't know what the requirements are in your university or in Indonesia, in general. In Malaysia, for example, in our public universities, as academics, we have been asked to really be careful about where we publish, because there is a trend. There has been this trend that, has been kind of gaining momentum over the years. And we see more and more academics, as well as postgraduate students, being tempted to publish in what we refer to as predatory journals. And this is a real problem. It's serious, and it's something that I know Indonesia is struggling with as much as Malaysia. Yeah? Let me just go into the chat, because I'm just wondering whether there are any questions so far. Okay, nothing yet. So I hope you can all hear me. Okay. Sorry. All right. So before I continue, I just want to highlight what my aims are in this session. We have a 2-hour session today. So my focus is on two things, right, which I believe we need to understand as researchers who are interested in publishing in quality journals, right? Number one, we want to ask ourselves this very important question. What makes some journals more reputable than others, right? Why is it more reputable to publish in certain journals compared to other journals? And what I want to draw your attention to is the structure of quality journal papers. If you want to target reputable journals and you want to publish in journals which are of good quality, good standing in the academic world, then there must be an awareness about the kind of structure which is involved in presenting your research work. The problem is not the research, because we are all capable of doing good research and we have good data to check. But the challenge is presenting that in a way which is accepted by the larger academic community, right? So what I want to first draw your attention to is the structure of quality journal papers. And I hope this knowledge will help you present your research in a more systematic way so that you stand a better chance of publishing in reputable journals. The second focus is on language. As you and I know, if we are really targeting good quality journals, we stand a better chance of achieving this if we target journals which are published in the English language. So for you and I, English is not a native language. It's not our native language. It is a second language for some of us, or a foreign language for others. It is not a language that we use all the time. And so it is understandable that we struggle to some extent with language. So in the second part of my presentation, I want to draw your attention a little bit to this idea of adding your voice to your writing. Because one of the things, one of the issues which a lot of academics have is in their failure to interpret their readings. So very often when a literature review is done, for example, what we tend to do is we tend to report what we have read. So we say Jones said this, Smith said this, Wright described this, and all we do is report what other people have done. But by doing that, you are failing to show the thinking on your part, right? So when you read something, what are your reflections on what you have read? And for that, you need to add your voice to your writing. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So these are the two main aims that I have as we go into this session. Now, I want to go back or return to the point I raised just now about knowing what is quality writing. Because if you don't know what is quality writing, then you cannot replicate that. You know, if I ask all of you now, right, I give you, let's say I give you about 20 minutes and I tell you to write an essay, right? I tell you to write an essay about your family. All of you can do it, right? I can give you 10 minutes and you would be able to write at least a paragraph about your family. However, if I ask you to write an essay related to, let's say, the financial market in Indonesia, all right, or public listed companies in Indonesia, you will need more time because what you write will depend on what you read, right? So academic writing is essentially about this coming together of your reading and your writing. Your writing is evidence of your reading. So how do you, bring ideas together from different sources from the many articles that you're reading, how do you bring these ideas together and how do you make it your own? And this is something that we have to learn. How do we learn this? We learn this by reading quality work, quality research. So if you refer to good journal articles and you find it very systematic, presented well, then that's the kind of structure and format that you want to follow. However, if you are not careful with what you are reading and you just take anything that you find from Google Scholar, because you want to keep in mind, Google Scholar captures everything which is on the internet. As researchers, we must be able to distinguish the good from the bad. Because if we take material at random and we fail to distinguish between the two, we run the risk of capturing information from sources which are of poor quality. When we take information from sources which are of poor quality, then our work also becomes of poor quality. There is this risk of damaging the quality of our work by failing to select quality work, right? So one of the challenges that all of us face today, and I asked this question just now, is it easier to publish today? Yes. But as a researcher, regardless of whether you are an academic or a PhD student, it is actually more challenging now than it was some years ago. Simply because there is so much out there in terms of journals, number of journals. There are hundreds and thousands of journals out there. And your challenge as a researcher is knowing what to include and what to reject when you are writing. So we must be aware about the dangers of predatory journals, and we must avoid these journals because citing them or contributing to them damages our reputation, right? And it's not just your individual reputation, you damage the reputation of your faculty as well as your university. And on a broader scale, you even damage the reputation of the nation. Let me show you an example of this. I think you are aware about this, but I'm going to share this with you. This is from a recent article which was published this year in 2021. Look at this map carefully. I'm sure you know where Indonesia is, right? And you know where Malaysia is. What this shows you is the seriousness of this problem of publishing in predatory journals, right? This is a serious problem. It's a bigger problem in some countries compared to other countries. Unfortunately, as this map shows you, the problem is very serious in Indonesia as well as Malaysia, right? If you see the scale, the countries which are in the darker tone are the countries where this problem is particularly serious, according to this research which was published recently. I think you may have already come across this study, but I'm happy to share the article with you later. I've taken this excerpt from this article. You can go online and look for this article as well. And look at this sentence. This is from the abstract, actually. And the sentence, and the sentence says, in the most affected countries, including Kazakhstan and Indonesia, around 17% of articles, all articles published, right? 17% fall into the predatory category, while some other countries have no predatory articles whatsoever. So this is a reflection of how serious this problem is. Yeah. So I return to this map again, and you see where we are. A serious problem in Malaysia as well, right? And the problem is made worse by ignorance and not knowing about the dangers of predatory journals. Look at this. This is from the same article. These are the countries which are ranked, right, in terms of the problem with predatory journals. Top of the list is Kazakhstan. Indonesia is second. Malaysia is fifth. So this problem of publishing in low quality predatory journals is a serious issue in our region, in Indonesia as well as in Malaysia, right? And this is something that as academics, we don't want to fall in this category. We want to target reputable journals and publish in reputable journals. So the question now is, do we know the difference between quality journal articles and predatory publications? I think on a very general, superficial level, I think many of you know how predatory journals work. Usually, they send out random emails to people, inviting them to submit papers to them. They charge people to pay and publish, right? You have to pay, like 400 euros or, 500 USD, and then you have some lower level predatory journals which charge something like 100 US. Okay, and the question now is, why are you paying to publish when you have the option of publishing in good journals which do not require you to make any payment? What's the reason? The main reason for academics is they want a quick turnaround. They don't want to wait too long before the paper gets published. If you target a good journal that you want to publish in, it may take anywhere between 6 months to a year before your journal comes out, right? And so this becomes a challenge. I know it's a challenge here in Malaysia. It's probably the same in Indonesia. I think there is a question. Someone has raised their hand. Do you have a question or a comment to make? Vivo? Any question? Maybe not. Maybe you typed that accidentally, right?
I think before, I think.
Sorry?
Before 1904.
Sorry, I cannot hear you at all. Okay, let me continue. Maybe you could type your question in the chat, and then I will try and capture that there. Yeah. All right. Let me go on to my next slide. So right now, what I would like to do is share some articles with you. Let me try doing that. Sorry. I will now try and share some articles with you. How do I do this, Renato? I don't see the option to share articles here in the chat. Where can I share the article? I want to share some articles with you so that you can to illustrate, yeah, the exercise. Maybe I need to stop sharing first. Let me stop sharing. How can I want to share some articles. Can I add an attachment here in the chat?
Perhaps you can share in the screen, Doctor.
I can't hear you, Renato.
Can you hear me?
Louder, please.
Check. Can you hear me? Well,
No. I tell you what, Renato,
check,
maybe,
check. You can hear me?
yeah, Renato,
Okay.
I'm
Yes.
going to share the article in WhatsApp to you. Can you share it with the participants?
Yeah, I will. You can share it on my WhatsApp, and I will.
Okay, I'll
share.
do that now. Yeah. So I'm going to share 4 articles first. Okay, Renato, I hope you can share this with the participants now, the 4 articles.
I didn't receive anything for you.
I've shared it in WhatsApp.
Okay.
Okay, so let me continue with my presentation while Renato
Yes. Go ahead.
shares the articles with you. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So back to the point I was trying to make just now. For us to write well, if we want to write good journal articles and we want to publish in reputable journals, what we need to do is first understand what is it that constitutes a good journal article. So for us to understand what constitutes a good journal article, we need to look at samples of good journal articles. And my aim here is to draw your attention to the features of this good journal article. Now, I am going to share, and I think Renato is in the process of sharing these articles with you. But while you are waiting to look at the article that Renato is going to share, let me show you the article on my screen. All right. So just now, I started off with some, not so good news when I talked about predatory journals and how this is such a serious problem in countries like Indonesia and Malaysia. However, having said that, I also want to stress here that there are many excellent studies which are coming out from Indonesia, right? So I want to show you what some of your fellow researchers in Indonesia are publishing. And why is it that these articles are successful in being published in some of the top journals in the world? So this is a journal which is published by Routledge. So this is a reputable publisher, and this is it's a good journal. The article, as you Can you see? I hope you can see my article. Can you just show me your thumbs up so that I know you can see the article? Can you see it on my screen? Are you able to see?
Yes.
You
Yes.
can, huh? Okay, all right, good. So this article is written by Esther Kunjara and Chan Yao Hun. So I think Esther is Indonesian. She is from Surabaya, Indonesia, right? She's a researcher. And this paper is a quality journal publication. Why do I say it's a quality journal publication? You can check, you can go into Web of Science and see this journal, whether it's listed, Southeast Asia Research. You may also check Scopus to see whether it is listed there. And obviously, it is published by a reputable publisher, Routledge. I'm sure you've heard of Routledge, right? So let me make this bigger. All right. So this paper, it may not be something which is relevant to your discipline, but let's just look at this as an example. Reassessing Chinese-Indonesian stereotypes 2 decades after Reformasi, right? Now, like other journal articles, you have an abstract, and then it begins with an introduction. Let's look at this introduction. I'm not going to read it word by word, and I don't expect you to read it word by word. But what I want to highlight to you is what the authors are doing. And I want you to understand what the authors are doing so that you can keep this in mind when you are writing your introduction as well, right? So if you look at this introduction, it starts off, again, let's look at the title. The title is Reassessing Chinese-Indonesian Stereotypes 2 decades after Reformasi. I'm not too sure what Reformasi is. I think some of you know, right? Because you are Indonesians. This is done in the Indonesian context, but it's about Chinese Indonesians. It's about stereotyping, and it's 2 decades after Reformasi, right? So this is the article. Obviously, in the introduction needs to paint the backdrop for the study. So the introduction will talk about what is Reformasi, right? And how has this affected the Chinese-Indonesian community? And how are the Chinese-Indonesians stereotyped? These are the main questions that come to my mind, that come to your mind when you look at this title. So the background of the study, the introduction, must answer these questions because this is the title. So the introduction is guided by the title, right? So we go into the introduction, and the introduction will give the background of Reformasi, of the Chinese-Indonesian community, right? And then we see citations, we see statistics given, all right? And these statistics contribute to helping us understand the seriousness of the problem, right? Whatever the problem is. And then it goes on. It traces the history. We're not going to read all this, right? But this is what is happening in the introduction. You might tell me, well, I write like this also. I also give the background. I also talk about the problem in the introduction. But some of the things I want to draw your attention to. Number one, this article was published in 2020. Is it 2020? Let me have a look. Yeah, 2020 publication, right? If it's 2020 publication, it went online in 2019. If it went online in 2019, the researchers probably submitted this article in 2018, right? So keep in mind that this article was written in 2018. Being written in 2018, look at the citations being cited. This is by an Indonesian writer, yeah, in a reputable journal. Sources cited are fairly recent, 2015, right? 2017, right? And this was written in 2018. So it goes on. It explains the backdrop, the situation, right? We go down. talks about reformasi. It gives a lot of background information. Then there's a subsection on stereotypes of Chinese Indonesians. Remember, I told you, looking at the title itself, I'm asking myself, what is the problem with the Chinese in Indonesia? And why are they stereotyped, right? So usually we know people are very often stereotyped based on ethnicity, okay? And in Indonesia, the study is different. Now, I go back to the point I made just now. When we do research, we want to contribute new knowledge, right? If you think about knowledge as layers upon layers of knowledge, layer upon layer, from years now, this author is not the first person to look at stereotypes in Indonesia. This author is not the first person to look at the Chinese community in Indonesia. This author is not the first person to examine reformasi in Indonesia. Many people have done that. So the question in our mind when we read this journal article is, what is new in this journal article? What is the new knowledge, right? If you want to add new knowledge, you cannot be referring to journal articles that talked about reformasi 20 years ago, because other people have added new layers, right? 2010 is here, 2011, 2012, 2013, 14, 15, 16. Every few years, people have added new knowledge. So let's look at this sentence here. This part in yellow, yeah? You have this article as well. The study of Chinese Indonesian stereotypes has been continuously revisited by scholars since Charles Koppel's monograph 1983, especially following the 1998 anti-Chinese riots. So in Indonesia, there was this anti-Chinese riots in 1998. Chang Yao-hoon's 2008 study of Chinese identity in post-Suharto Indonesia in 2004 discussed how non-Chinese informants in Jakarta perceive Chinese Indonesian stereotypes in terms of racial differences. What is the author doing here? What the author is doing here is the author is setting the stage for the problem, right? Other people have done this research as well. Chang Yao-hoon has done a study in 2008. What did he do? He argued that the boundary of difference between the Pribumi and Chinese is imagined and maintained through perpetuating stereotypes. Hoon found that such differences just follow what I'm saying, yeah, just be patient, found that such differences may form a dualism wherein Chinese Indonesians are seen as oppressors and Pribumi as victims, which neglects the complexity of power relations. Then he goes on, right? He talks about the problem. So let me go down. Look at this sentence here. So the authors are referring to a study done in 2008, right, by Hoon. The fact that Hoon's study was conducted just a few years after 1998, after the 1998 tragedy, means that the emotions were still raw and the collective memories of the trauma among his informants might have been constructed in racial terms rather than considered as a broad conflict of power. What is the author doing here? This author of this paper is trying to identify a weakness, a limitation, or something which made the study not as relevant now as it was in 2008. By highlighting this possible weakness in Hoon's study, this author is now presenting what this paper is going to do. Our present study, therefore, is interested in how Chinese stereotypes have evolved 2 decades after the 1998 riots. This is the research gap, right? Very well presented. So the question is, why are you doing the study? Here is the answer. The last time the study was done, it was soon after the 1998 tragedy. So the data collected then about Chinese stereotypes is going to be very different from the way the Chinese are being stereotyped after 2 decades now. Therefore, this study is warranted. I can tell you one of the main reasons why this article was accepted by this journal was because of this statement. This author has successfully highlighted that this study is contributing new knowledge, and top journals, quality journals, want to know what is this new knowledge you are contributing. If they are not convinced that you are contributing new knowledge, they will not accept your paper. Yeah, and this is something you want to keep in mind when you are presenting your introduction. It is not enough for you to just give the background. But once you're given the background, you must draw attention to the research gap, right? What is it that other people have not done as well? And how are you going to address that in your paper? So this is what needs to happen in your introduction. Okay, then it goes on. So then it comes to the method. Then we go on to another article, yeah? Because I know that I see that this is the economics faculty. So maybe this paper may be more relevant to you. This paper is also written by Indonesian authors, and it is published by Sage. You know that Sage is a reputable publisher also. This article was published in 2018. That means it went online maybe 2017, maybe written in 2016, 2017, thereabouts, right? The title of this paper is Innovative Barriers and their impact on innovation, evidence from Indonesian manufacturing firms. Authors are Harif Hartono and Kusuma Wardani. Okay, this is also a Scopus Index Journal, Global Business Review. Okay, and the publisher is a well-respected publisher, Sage. Now let's look at this introduction as well. In this introduction, again, looking at the title, Innovation Barriers and their impact on innovation, evidence from Indonesian manufacturing firms. Immediately we ask ourselves, what questions do we have in mind? First, obviously we know innovation is important, but how is this relevant to Indonesian manufacturing firms? And then, why are there barriers? What are these barriers? What is stopping innovation in the context of Indonesian manufacturing firms? So we start off with the introduction. And in the introduction, the background is presented. Yeah. The background is presented, obviously, about innovation. Look at the citations. If this article was written in 2016, look at the sources being cited. Again, current literature. Why? Because you're adding to the layers of knowledge. When you add to the layers of knowledge, you have to add to the most recent layer, right? So people are being cited here. They're talking about innovation, maybe in the manufacturing industry. We're not going to read it, in too much detail. Now look at the second paragraph. Several innovation survey-based innovation barrier studies in developing countries have been conducted. So what is the author saying? I am not the first person to examine innovation barriers. All these people have examined innovation barriers. They've done it, right? And it goes back a few years. But he notes, what do the authors note? These studies were done in different countries, in Brazil, Cyprus, China, Malaysia, Turkey, right? And then comes this sentence. Surprisingly, to date, there is no empirical analysis of innovation barriers in the context of Indonesian firms, right? Derived from the Indonesian Innovation Survey. So there's a gap there to say that, when you want to study innovation barriers, obviously they are different from one country to another country. And no one has done this kind of a study in the Indonesian context. Therefore, I am going to do the study. You see the pattern here? I showed you just now in the other article. And I can, you can try it yourself. You open any research article, method section, yeah, in any reputable journal published, you will find a research gap statement like this, for sure, right? Therefore, investigating this issue is essential to explore innovation barriers experienced by Indonesian firms and enriches the Indonesian barriers literature. Right? So it talks about why this study is important. Then goes to the next paragraph. In the case of Indonesia, existing studies have linked innovation barriers to a range of development issues. So, innovation barriers have also been studied in Indonesia. However, the studies, this is an important sentence, the studies tend to be case studies of specific industries. So the authors have identified another problem with researchers done in the past. Studies done in the past have largely been case studies. For example, then he gives examples. So even though we don't read the rest of the article, do you think that this researcher, this paper, right, is it going to be based on a case study? No, because this researcher is highlighting a weakness in studies before this. Studies before this, they have focused on case studies. So if you go down, let's just go down to the method section. Method section. What are they doing? Multi-stage random sampling. Questionnaires, 1,500 firms. Is it a case study? No. So what this researcher, this paper is doing is, it is challenging or pushing the boundaries of research method. They have found, yes, people have studied innovation barriers, but they've all done it on using a case study approach. But this study is more quantitative in nature, therefore contributing a new layer of knowledge. You see? So there's more than one gap that this study is filling. One, it is being done in the Indonesian context, which has not been done before. And then it's moving away from case studies and using a quantitative approach to data collection. This makes the study valuable and worthy of publication in a Scopus journal. Right? So the question that I keep coming back to is, what makes this a good quality journal article? Because they have done this. They have given the background, they have identified and explained the research gap very well. And therefore, this kind of a paper is considered for publication in top quality journals. Yeah. Let me go into the chat because I see some questions here. Maybe I will take some questions here before I go on. Okay, there's a question from Kazi here. Are predatory journals found among good publishers? Well, Kazi, the question now is, what do you mean by good publishers? That's the challenge, right? Unfortunately, based on conversations that I've had even with other academics, some people say, oh, this is a good publisher, right? But what do you mean by a good publisher? If I can be very honest with you, I have found myself, when I do research now, when I am looking for literature from Google Scholar, one of the first things I look at is who the publisher of the article is. It's not a nice thing to say. And I think what I'm doing may not be accepted by everyone, right? But in my mind, I have some personal views on who these good publishers are. Yes, Sage, Emerald, Springer, Elsevier, Routledge, Wiley, Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press. These kinds of publishers, I feel very safe because I know they are well established. They are well established and they have the reputation to maintain. So I am quite happy to cite articles from journals which are published by these large publishing houses. Having said that, one of the reasons why we have turned to open access journals is to challenge publishers like this. Because in the past, they were in control and it was very difficult for us to access these articles. You know that even now, if you go into these journals, you want to access articles, you have to pay and access. So what other publishers are saying is, the new publishers, is that we are now providing articles for free. Therefore, we ask the authors to pay. Unfortunately, this has created a large industry where publishers are mushrooming every day. You go into Jeffrey Beall's website. Beall, yeah, let me just, I'm sure you know. I'm going to type the name here, right? Beall. You just Google Beall. You will find in his website, there are literally thousands of publishers, thousands. And one publisher may be publishing hundreds of journals. And so this problem has become uncontrollable. But as a researcher, you and I, our interest is in quality work. So even if you ignore who the good publishers are, if you are able to look at an introduction like what I did just now, and you see that the paper is written well, the research gap is presented, then by all means you can cite that kind of an article. Yeah, but let me show you another example. I think Renato has shared this article with you also. Okay.
I already give the link,
Yeah,
so the
thank you,
participant
Yeah,
can
thank
download
you.
it.
Now, this is another journal article. Yeah? This is written by the European Journal of Human Resource Management Studies. I don't know who this journal is, but I know who the publisher is. OAPUB, OA Publications. If you go into Jeffrey Beall's website, you will find this being listed. I am not telling you that this is a bad journal article, right? I am not in a position to tell you this is bad. But this is a journal article. Let's look at this journal article together. Apparatus Performance as Mediation of Creativity and Innovation towards the Successful Application of E-Kelurahan. The authors are from Indonesia and Malaysia. Okay, so I'm not attacking anyone personally, yeah, but this is the research article. So again, let's look at the title. Apparatus Performance as Mediation of Creativity and Innovation towards the Successful Application of E-Kelurahan. Looking at the title, I would expect the introduction to tell me what is this E-Kelurahan, right? And then how does it tie to creativity and innovation, right? And what is this apparatus performance, right? These are questions that come to mind. And then what I showed you just now in articles 1 and 2 was the research gap which was presented very clearly. Even though it was a discipline which we may not be familiar with, we could immediately understand what the research gap was. And those were articles written by Indonesian authors in top tier journals, right? In quality journals. Now, let's look at this introduction. Look at these sentences here, right? Indonesia is a developing country with a very stable economic growth. Innovation is the key success. So they talk about innovation. And then in recent years, political leaders and managers have emphasized the importance of innovation to meet public needs, blah, blah, blah. It goes on. Again, we don't need to read everything. And then comes e-government, right? Some reference to e-government. About Indonesia's policy on e-governance. And then there's some reference to Gunung Panjang village, Keledang River village, Samarinda district. Okay. The innovation is in the form of e-kelurahan, which is part of the e-government. Okay. And then back to Gunung Panjang village. And then something about innovation again. Knowledge of innovation. Although some previous, okay, something about previous, okay, let's look at this. Previous studies discuss the determinants of the adoption of innovations that exist, but not necessarily an organization that continues. Although some previous studies discussed the determinants of the adoption of innovations that exist, but not necessarily an organization that continues. To be honest, I cannot understand the sentence. In terms of language, there's some problem here. I think what they're talking about when they say organization that continues, maybe it is organizations that still operate, maybe, I'm not sure. Anyway, let's continue. Cross-organization in the study of the implementation of innovation is a rare thing. Cross-organization. In general, a qualitative case study that features an innovation implementation site. Each of these studies explains the flowchart of how the implementation works. However, most will lose the integrative model that captures and clarifies various multi-level phenomena from the implementation of innovation. I find this paragraph difficult to understand. I don't know about you. Maybe you are, because you are economics people, you may understand this better than me. But I find this quite difficult to understand, and I'm not sure what the authors are trying to say here. All right, and then it goes on. Cites a study, another study on IT practices and organization. And then it goes to literature review. What is human resource management? What is creativity? Keep in mind, this is not a textbook, but this is a journal article, right? But they go on to talk about creativity. They talk about innovation, 5 types of innovation. They talk about performance, application of technology, and then they go into hypothesis development already. My question is, what is the new knowledge which this paper is trying to contribute? And I don't quite see it in this paper. Right? And I find the language is also quite tedious, right, for us to read and comprehend. If you are interested or you know about predatory journals, if you go to the website, right? I don't think we have time for this, but if you go to the OA publication website, I can invite you to do that, right? Go into the website, look at how many journals they have. Also, look at how many journals start with the phrase European journal, blah, blah, blah. European journal of this, European journal of that. If it is a European journal, ask yourself, look at the authors who are submitting articles there. and publishing. How many of them are from European countries? Probably none. Most of them are probably from this part of the world, because I think Malaysians, Indonesians, Indians from India, they are drawn to these phrases like European, American, international, blah, blah, blah. And this is these are some of the strategies which predatory publishers make use of when they want to draw authors from this part of the world who are willing to pay and publish. I know we are not looking at this line by line, sentence by sentence, but I invite you to look at this carefully again and compare this with the two articles we saw just now in terms of the presentation of the research gap. It is my contention that the research gap is not evident in this paper, right? And this is a problem. Yeah. Okay, I've been talking nonstop for so long. I've given you one more article, which is this article, which is also in Indonesia. I would like to give you about, say about 5 minutes, to just look at this. You know, I talked to you just now. We looked at Article 1, Article 2, the good journals, and I told you why it was good, the way it was presented. I want you to look at this article, this introduction, and go through it, see whether you can find the research gap. If you can find the research gap, use the highlighter and highlight it to me and tell me what is good about this. Is this a good article or is this a poorly written article? What is your opinion? All right, I'll give you about 5 minutes to just look at it for you to tell me whether this is good or not good and why. Don't have to read the whole article, yeah? Just until, just the introduction. Just read the introduction very quickly and tell me whether it's a good or a bad article and why. I'll give you 5 minutes. please post your comments in the chat about this article. Is it good? Do you think it's good or not good, and why? Okay, I see someone has posted. Was that you, Renato? Okay. What about the rest of you? Some comments that you want to make about this article?
Yeah. In the especially in the introduction, I cannot see the,
Yeah.
the scholars provide looks like the gap and past studies. So
Yeah.
I think this is a poor quality journal, I think.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's look at this article together. So this title says Indonesian National Security Policy in Fighting Terrorism Among the Youth Generation, right? Again, like I said, you know, the predatory journals, this is a predatory journal. They always use phrases like this, right? Canadian, American, European, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at the articles, sometimes they publish like a magazine. Every month, a new issue comes out. Every month. And each article will have like so many articles published there. And none of them would have Canadian authors. Even the chief editor is from China or something like that, right? I'm not saying that is bad, but these are some things that will have to make you think, do I want to be part of this community? And one thing I want you to keep in mind, Noni asked this question just now about predatory journals as well, yeah? Once your name is on a predatory journal article, it is going to be there for life. You cannot undo it. You can't change it, right? It is going to be there for life. And even later on in life, you feel, oh, you know, I can write better articles now. I don't want my name to be part of a journal, which is a predatory journal. You cannot do anything because it's out there already in the internet. So really think carefully about where you publish, especially those of you who are younger. Remember that you have your entire career in front of you. You go and get involved in predatory journals now, this is going to come back and haunt you years from now, right? So, you know, be careful. So as Renato pointed out, Kazi also mentioned this, you can't see the problem statement here. It's just talking about, it's like reading a magazine, right? It's about Indonesia's national resilience, and then, you know, terrorist attacks. Indonesia has experienced terrorist attacks. And then there's some statistics here given about the global terrorism index. But what is the aim here of giving the statistics? Where is this statistics leading in terms of discussion? And that's it. And then it goes to method. Look at the method section, yeah? Although we're not looking at method here, but 3 lines. Do you think any reputable journal will accept a research paper where the method section is explained in just 2 sentences? Right? So this already tells you that this is not a journal of good quality. So the question is, do you want to be part of this community? Right? Do you want to attach your name? Maybe your article is a good article, right? Do you want your good article to be in the company of articles like this? Right? This is something that we must all be wary about. Okay? And if you see here, the gap statement is not here. So in the 2 good journals that we saw, Article 1 and Article 2, both authors did this. They gave the background, the backdrop, right? What the issue was, they provided that well. The language was simple and clear. And then they also made a point of telling us who has done research in this area. What have they looked at? What were the weaknesses or limitations of those studies? And then how they were going to address those limitations in their study. Like just now, remember, we talked about how past studies, you notice they were all case studies. And therefore now it's going to be statistical analysis of based on surveys, right? And then the previous study, again, there was a research gap about how for 2 decades, there has been no investigation of Chinese-Indonesian stereotypes. So has the stereotype changed now? Right? That's the justification for the investigation. So this is very important that as researchers, when we present our study in our introduction, we must do all this. Provide the background with citations, current citations, right? Explain how you are adding a new layer of knowledge. Yeah. Okay. Renato, can you see my slide?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I can see that.
So we looked at some articles. What you need to understand is this. In your introduction of your research articles, there are 3 things that need to happen. Number 1, you must establish a territory. What do I mean by establishing a territory? Where does your study lie? So just now, for example, it was in the area of manufacturing firms in Indonesia, right? In this part where you establish the territory, you need to include citations, current citations. You see the article that we just saw just now, the one in the Canadian journal. How many citations were there compared to the first 2 articles that we saw? The first 2 articles had more citations, more references, right? You must indicate your research gap, right? You must clearly explain how your study is adding a new layer. Because without explaining this, you cannot get published in a good journal. Yeah. And only then do you announce your study, right? Of course, the other things that you can do, depending on the type of study, you may have research questions or you may have hypotheses. You may want to summarize the methods, right? These are some optional things. But what is obligatory or mandatory is this. Step 1, step 2, and step 3, presenting your work, right? These are things that must happen in your introduction. What I would advise you to do, right? Whether you are academics or if you are, PhD students, I always tell my students to do this. When you are reading research work, if you're reading good research work, you will find where the gap statement is, where the limitations are, and what the recommendations are. Let's look at the articles again. In this article, I'm going back to this article on the Chinese stereotypes. Yeah, just refer to your own article that you have with you. If I go down, we saw the research gap just now, right? Where was the research gap? Right, the research gap was here. This part here, right? After 2 decades, they are investigating this after the 1998 riots, and they've justified it. That was the gap. Then we go down. If you go to the method section, when you, as researchers, every method has its limitations. No method is perfect. So that is one of the things that you as a researcher can focus on, highlight, right? If you look here in this article, for example, start here. However, we found that there was little significant change of mind compared to the original interviews. We conjecture that this could be due to the location of Surabaya, which is far from the political center in Jakarta, where the demonstrations had taken place. So the writers are highlighting to you that when they interviewed the Chinese Indonesians, they interviewed Chinese Indonesians in Surabaya. And the Chinese Indonesians in Surabaya did not feel as much of an impact as the Chinese Indonesians in Jakarta. They are actually not directly, but indirectly opening or suggesting to you that maybe future research may want to involve Chinese Indonesians in Jakarta, right? That could be a limitation of this particular study, okay? But if you look at the second article, the one about the firms in Indonesia, yeah, this article. Innovation barriers, right? This article, we go down. Where do you usually find comments about the limitations? We go down. Conclusion, right? We go down to the conclusion section. Let's see whether there are any comments about limitations. I think, yes, in the last paragraph. Finally, the limitations of this study need to be acknowledged. First, this is the limitation, right? They explain the limitations. And then they also give recommendations for future studies. Future studies should include blah, 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 goes on. So in any good research article, you will find the gap statement, the limitations, and the recommendations for future work. If you are a PhD student, right, are looking for an area to study, or if you're an academic looking for the next area to do research, you actually don't have to think too much about it. If you find a research paper in your area of interest, which was published this year, 2021. So the 2021 paper has added a new layer of knowledge, right? The latest layer of knowledge is added in 2021. I'm talking about you looking at good journals, journals published by Sage or Routledge or Wiley, right? Or Springer or Emerald. They've added the latest layer. You now want to add a new layer. When you want to add a new layer, look at the recommendations that they give. If you follow their recommendations, then you are going to add the next layer. If you identify the limitations of their studies in your study, you're adding a new layer. And your paper will most likely be published because you are adding a new layer to that knowledge, right? So a lot of students sometimes talk about how difficult it is. But I would say, actually, if you're reading the right articles, journals which are of good quality, they are helping you already. You don't have to, crack your head too much. Yeah. Okay. This is a good example of what we mean by a research gap. And remember how I told you about language. English is not my native language. It is not your native language. But we need to improve our proficiency in the language, because when we write, we try to emulate the writing of other people. Look at the parts that are highlighted in yellow here. This is all language, right? It's not content. Look at the first one. There have been a number of important recent developments. So the writer presents the recent developments. For example, Coast Guard and all. Focus was restricted to. Focus was restricted to. Why use this phrase, focus was restricted to? You want to highlight the weakness of Coast Guard's work, right? Not to say that Coast Guard was bad, but as a researcher, you want to show the limitations of past studies so that you can justify your study. So you say, oh, his study, the focus was restricted to this, right? And then Anderson, focus on something else. Then you add this sentence. We build on this by drawing from recent empirical work. We looked at the work of Coast Guard. We looked at the work of Clots. We are building on their work. So we are adding a new layer to their work, right? In this way, we further build upon existing reviews. I've got no time to read the whole paragraph, but this is a beautifully presented research, right? If you look at phrases like this, fifth, the previous reviews do not consider team design. So they highlight, they think, not only what people have done. You're not just saying, he said this, she said this, he said this, she said this, but you are talking about what people have not done. That shows your thinking, right? And then if they don't think about it, ignoring such factors would lead to an incomplete understanding. You see how they use the language, right? If people have only looked at this aspect, we don't completely understand the issue. Therefore, this study is justified. This is what we mean by a critical review. Now, sticking to the issue of language, right? Sticking to the issue of language, editors and reviewers of journals make this kind of comments. The work is good. The data is excellent, but the presentation is poor, and therefore the paper cannot be published. Not enough that you have good data, right? You've got to be able to present it well. How do you present it well? You follow the presentation styles of good writers, right? And then look at this comment. Logical linking between sentences, not related to previous literature well, not carefully tied to existing knowledge. All these comments is actually about language. Think about it. It's all about language, right? And so there's a need for you to make sure that your voice is added to your writing. What do I mean by adding your voice? Basically, you do two things. You describe, right? You describe, and then you interpret what you have described. Two things must happen: describe and interpret. Yeah. Let me go. What do I mean by describe? All of you write sentences like this, right? I'm sure you've done this, right? You say, according to Jones, blah, blah, blah. Evans found, Evans opined, Evans suggested, blah, blah, blah. What are you doing? You are describing. That's all you're doing. This is what Jones said. This is what Evans said. This is fine. But your entire literature review cannot just be describing. You must move from describing to interpreting what you have presented. So what do we mean by interpreting? Look at this example here. Look at this sentence. Evans showed that the method was successful. And this was significant because who is saying that it is significant? Is it Evans who says it's significant? No, right? It is you, the writer. You are saying it's significant. When you say something is significant, you are adding your voice, right? It is your opinion. You are saying it's significant. This was significant because it represented a major shift from prior research, moving the focus back to personnel away from more traditional concerns. This is what I mean by moving from the descriptive to the interpretive. Let's look at one more example, the one below. In relation to efficacy of method, Wang et al. Then re-interviewed each participant. What are you doing here? You're just reporting what Wang did, right? Wang re-interviewed each participant. And in so doing, found a revealing new set of emerging responses. This is descriptive. You are just describing. And then you add another layer. Bruce, 2016, argues these findings were crucial. What's the meaning of crucial? Very important. This is an opinion, right? This word crucial here is added by you to show your feelings. You feel that Bruce's arguments, or rather the findings by Wang were crucial. Why? As they highlighted a significant set of secondary level responses, blah, blah, blah. So this is where language can help. If you add phrases like this, right? Let's say you've written your literature review. You say, you say things like this, according to Jones, right? Evans found, blah, blah, blah. Once you have written this, take a break, go back to it and ask yourself, can I add this kind of phrases somewhere? This shows that this is important because this is worth noting because this calls to attention. This can be illustrated by adding phrases like this and completing the sentence, you are now moving from describing to interpreting. So this can be like a checklist for you, right? This can be a checklist to ask yourself, have I added this kind of phrases in my writing or not? If you have added this kind of phrases, then you are moving from describing to interpreting. Look at this example. This is called a layered approach, a layered approach. So for example, let's look here, yeah? In a 2011 study, Brent found that elderly patients were blah, blah, blah. This is just describing, yes, Brent found. Then you add another sentence. Her study, however, was limited in its application as she chose to focus on a small sample size. What are you doing here? As a writer, you are now attacking the work of Brent. Her study was limited in its application. This is your personal opinion, correct? So this is your voice. Now, when I say critique, you can do two things. It can be a positive critique or it can be a negative critique. Is this positive or negative? This is negative, right? You're talking about why the work was limited. After you give a negative critique, then you can offer a solution. It may, possible. It may have been more illustrative to broaden the scope, blah, blah, blah. So here you are providing a solution. So you describe, you critique, you offer a solution. This is one way of adding voice to your writing. Not just he said this, she said this, he said this, she said this. Where is your critique? Where are your solutions? This is something for you to think about in your writing. Yeah. Like I said just now, it can be negative, deficit critique, or it can be a strength critique. What do we mean by strength? You use words like this: significant, groundbreaking, impressive. That already shows your attitude. You believe that this was good. However, I must caution you, as researchers, we must show that we are objective. We cannot simply say groundbreaking, fantastic everywhere. You must be very careful about using these phrases and words. But again, this is one way of adding voice to your writing. Yeah, especially in your literature review section, in your discussion of your findings. When you discuss your findings, it's not just about you saying that your finding is consistent with somebody's work, or that your finding is inconsistent with somebody's work. Speculate. Why do you think the finding was different? What is a possible reason for it? Yeah. So here's another example. So here you can see the interpreting, which is in green, and then the positive critique, which is in blue, right? So look, we're not going to read the whole thing, but if you just look at the phrases, right? This suggests that you're speculating, right? This understanding is crucial because, right? Then words like pivotal, successful, clear, right? This shows your positive view, right? You think it was a good piece of work, okay? And then implications, right, that you're speculating on. So these are different ways of adding voice to your writing. Yeah. Finally, this is my final slide, right? If this is a helpful checklist for you, right? When you're writing, I think some of you have already written papers which you want to send somewhere for publication. If you are, working on your paper, my advice to you, number one, look at your introduction. Make sure you have cited current sources from quality journals. Number two, make sure that you have clearly described your research gap, right? Explain what your gap is and justify the reason for your study. And then where you have cited literature, in your literature review, in your discussion of your findings, ask yourself whether your voice is present. Have you interpreted the findings? Have you critiqued? Have you presented possible solutions, right? Where suitable, try to add your voice and beef up your journal article and submit your journal articles to quality journals, which, it takes longer. It's a more tedious process, but the satisfaction you have when you publish in a journal which is published by Sage or Taylor and Francis or Routledge or Wiley or Emerald or Elsevier, there's a greater sense of confidence. You know that you are on par with other people from different parts of the world, right? That's the whole aim. Like I go back to this idea that you want to, the reason you do research, the reason you want to publish your work is to share your work with a larger audience. Yeah. Predatory journals can only take you to a point, and it's not a good point to be, because slowly as information emerges, everybody knows about this. And I showed you just now evidence that this is affecting the reputation of not just you, your university, your faculty, but also the country. Yeah? So this is something we must address as academics and researchers. Let me go in, check the chat box to see whether there are questions. Then I will try and, yeah, like newspaper, all right. Renato, do they have an option to speak and ask questions?
We can proceed if their
okay.
wants to.
Then maybe I will stop my presentation here.
Yes, we can discuss.
Because we've only got maybe about another 10 minutes or so, right? Maybe people want to speak and ask questions or give your experience or your opinions. I'm happy to discuss them with you.
Okay, for the participant, if you want to give one question to Dr. Ramesh.
Bahasa Indonesia pun boleh.
Oke, jadi kita persilakan untuk mungkin pertama dengan ini ya, melambaikan tangan, nanti langsung bisa untuk mengajukan pertanyaan. Untuk semua partisipasi kami persilakan.
Kalau ada soalan atau pendapat, mungkin nak cerita sedikit tentang pengalaman sendiri.
Until now, kita tak.
So like I said just now, in the second part where I talked about voice, right? Interpreting positive critique, negative critique, deficit critique. Look at the journal articles, the good journal articles, and look at the literature review section. Also look at the discussion of their findings, and you will find evidence of such discussions taking place. Look at the language being used, and that can be a guide for us. Yeah. So, the challenge, I think, could be language. Yeah. Language could be a major challenge for many of us, but that can only be overcome by reading more. right? You have to read and get comfortable reading. If you find that when you read something, it's too difficult for you to understand, then put that article aside. Maybe you're not ready for that article. Look for something simpler for you to read, especially young students. I saw some images just now of young people. So I think you are all students and not lecturers. So if you want to talk about your experience, you can. Yeah. Kazi, yeah, you have a question? You're muted though. I can't hear you.
Maybe from Noni in the chat.
Okay. I think you need to unmute them. Is it, Renato? Oh, question from Noni here. Just want to confirm that from the form of research gap, we can make it to the critical review of our paper. How many papers you think would? Okay, all right. That's a good question, Noni, about how do you present the research gap. I don't think there's a magic number to say you have to refer to so many articles to present your gap. It really depends on how much work has been done in your area. You know, in some areas, there's been a lot. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I was just saying, Noni, there is no magic number in terms of how many sources you want to cite to present your research gap. In some, depending on some areas, maybe in some areas there's been a lot of studies done. You don't have to cite all those studies, but you need to narrow your parameters to a point which is manageable and look at current research. Let your research gap come from the recent work done in the area and highlight the weaknesses, highlight the studies with weaknesses which you are addressing in your paper, right? So if you are using, let's say, a content analysis, you're doing a content analysis, highlight studies which have not used a content analysis, and then critique those studies and talk about the limitations of, surveys, and talk about how there is a need to also consider, narratives from interviews and things like that. So it really depends on the strategy, the method that you are using, and the gap that you want to fill. You need to juxtapose that against the works of people who have not done what you plan to do. So that's a good way of strategizing to present your gap, Moni. Yeah. I think Kazi has a question. Yeah, Kazi?
Yes, Doctor. Thank you for your great lecture, actually. I don't have any question, but I want to say a little about my experience. Like when I was a very new student in research area, I didn't have much knowledge about writing research paper and how to even read articles. Yeah, but I participated several sessions, including your sessions, and that's really helped me a lot. The way you presented today, like I want to inspire other participants that if you guys follow the way, you must be benefited. Like I want to just inspire them. Don't be afraid. Just try to follow the way that Dr. Ramesh showed to us. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Kazi. And I think I'd like to just pick up. Maybe Kazi was not very clear. The point that Kazi was trying to make is about the importance of reading and how reading can be quite overwhelming. Because if you're looking at hundreds of journal articles out there, how much do you read? And Kazi is right in that you don't have to read everything line by line, word by word. You are reading, you must read purposefully. If you're looking for a research gap, you know where the research gap lies in a journal paper. It must be in the introduction. If that gap is relevant to you, then that article is relevant to you. Otherwise, just take what you need from the article. So be selective in what you read and capture, right? If you're looking for limitations of the study, go straight down to the conclusion section, right? So you need to kind of really be smart about how you read and write. And I think Kazi made this point as well just now. Just do it. In the sense, a lot of students, they read a lot, but they delay the writing because it's more tedious. So they just want to read and enjoy the reading process. I think I made the mistake as a student before as well. I think what you should do is keep writing from the beginning and don't expect your writing to be perfect, right? Writing is a process. You look at the journal articles, the good journal articles we saw just now, they were not written at one go, right? If you, I have written papers in journals, in journals published by Sage and by Taylor and Francis and so on. These writing is a process. When I first wrote sentences, it was rubbish and I knew it was not good. But you have to put it aside and come back to it again and then improve on it. It is a process of editing again and again and again, right? To come up with a good piece of writing. There's a question here from Heda Rosman. In our research, we always include previous research. What is the relationship with the research that I am doing? At the end of the chapter or conclusion and suggestion, then we are required to suggest variables that will become references for future studies and what is called novelty. Okay, so Heda, your first question is that you must include previous research, right? Because the point here, Heda, is that your research does not exist in a vacuum. It is not in isolation. It is one study in a larger area of studies. Many people are doing research in that area. So you need to locate your research against the work of other people. So that's what you are doing there, right? You are trying to locate your work, what you want to do, against what other people have done, so that people know where your study lies, right? So that is the aim, right? What is the relationship with the research that you are doing? So when you talk about the relationship, it doesn't mean that you want to say you are doing exactly what they are doing. You want to say that many people are doing research in this area because this is an important area of study. There's a lot of interest in this area. So you're not alone. But at the same time, you want to highlight the uniqueness of your study compared to what other people are doing. That's the real goal of the introduction section. The next thing, your next question is about at the end of the chapter or in the conclusion section, you want to recommend other variables. Definitely that is something that the editors of journals want you to include. If you don't include it, usually in the review, they will tell you to include it because your work must lead to something else, must lead to the next study, right? And so you must be able to direct the research, the next layer of research. And the novelty of your work, well, sometimes we call it this, it's kind of covered by the justification and the significance of your work, right? And in terms of the contribution of your work. Like just now we saw the article where they talked about how similar studies have been done in other countries, but not in Indonesia. Sometimes that is not considered a novelty enough. And that is why that researcher also highlighted that past studies used the case study approach, whereas the novelty here is that you're doing a quantitative analysis. So sometimes just saying, oh, this has not been done in Indonesia is not enough, especially for a PhD. Because for a PhD, you want to push the boundaries of theory as well as method. It's not enough to just say, I'm doing it in Indonesia because it's not been done in Indonesia before. That is not enough. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for that question, Heda. Yeah. So I think I'll return the session to you, Renato.
Okay.
I'd like to just quickly thank everybody for joining me today. I hope some of the information I've shared is helpful to you, and good luck with your research publication.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor, for your time to give us some knowledge about the article research. So next we can meet workshop again with you, and I hope all participants will be joined with us again. Thank you very much, Doctor.
All right, thank you. That's it.